chained by a beast locked in slumber. Sin washed away by the swift flow of time. I may know the answers. Journeys over snow and sand. What twist of fate has brought us to tread upon this land? Blessed by light and the burden of shadows, souls abide to an endless desire. I may know the answers. Though one question I still hear, what twist of fate has brought us to roads that run
Good morning and welcome everyone to LoreLines episode 129. Today we are going to be talking about the new raid that dropped in 7.1, Echoes of Vana'diel. There's a lot of meat here and a lot to talk about. Fortunately, we have a 4-hour episode that dives into a whole lot of it from a few weeks back. So, yeah, how is everybody doing today? So, none of that is coming across. Try again.
Oh, delightful.
Oh, there we
Hello?
go. Okay.
Okay.
We have sound.
The coffee is like
Tired.
slowly suffusing into my veins, so I'm getting there.
So coffee slash blood. It could be both. I'm working on mine right now too. Ayumi, do you need coffee?
I definitely do. I'll be right back.
Godspeed, Ayumi. May you find the nectar of the gods that
May
lies
the
in caffeine.
May the force be with you.
Meowth, how are you?
1 year older.
Oh, yes, that's right. You recently had a birthday. Happy birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Changing decades on us.
Yeah.
Are you feeling better as well?
I actually feel the same.
No, I'm sorry to hear that, friend. I hope you can get better soon.
Well, that's it. Good morning, everyone. So I'm assuming we've all played the raid.
Naturally.
Naturally, okay. I will assume that Ayumi's silence and Aeneas's giant thread on Twitter are confirmations for that as well. So yeah, the raid was super interesting, and usually we talk about the MSQ first, but this time we're talking about the raid first. I feel like the raid was kind of really loaded this time. There's a lot there. There's a lot to talk about, a lot to speculate on. So I guess we'll start with the raid unlock. You know, who's its Alexiel. I'm just gonna call him Alexiel.
Oh, Shawl. It's all Shawl. You haven't spent enough time studying the syntax of Yocketel yet.
No, clearly not. Showing up in Mamook, and actually knowing where he is.
Well, so that's less surprising than anything else because Mamook is also the name of where Mamulja live in Adargon in Final Fantasy XI. So he shows up, he wakes up, there's Mamulja everywhere, and he goes, "Oh, this must be Mamook because this is where Mamulja live," which of course he's correct in because it's the same township name. And then he comes to and kind of realizes this is not the Mamook that the coffee, it's doing its job. I promise I'm getting there. It's not the one that he is perhaps familiar with, if only by name. What's interesting, though, is that he was found in the cenote rather than appearing.
Right. Which is really interesting. I kind of interpreted this as, you know, their kind of like what if alternate version of reality. Is like, oh, what if the Mamulja weren't pieces of shit? And fortunately, they arrived after we fixed them.
Well, it's also, they weren't awful in 11 either, right? Because the entire story of 11, when you dig into it, is about, hey, maybe you shouldn't be prejudiced against people that you don't understand.
I mean, yeah, it's all about the Shadow Lord.
Right, but it's much how in the beginning in A Realm Reborn, right, Gaius talks about beast tribes and like, oh, there's nothing redeemable here, and you start getting into the Allied Society quests and like really learning about these different cultures, and you find out, oh, maybe war breeds prejudice breeds war, and it's an endless feedback loop that we have to break. And it's kind of a similar situation in 11 when it comes to Adargon. Especially as it pertains to the Mamulja, because that was kind of the expansion where they came in.
Okay. And I got the impression, and I say impression, but they pretty much outright state that Galul Jaja was like the big bad of the Mumblejaw.
Yeah, I mean, he was the warlord, right? Because he got, much like Raugrim ascending to power because of Odin and becoming the Shadow Lord because of like acts of racism perpetuated against his people. Galul Jaja got fed up with the Empire of Adargon's expansion and said, "No, enough is enough. We're going to start fighting back." So he was kind of perceived as like a warmongerer because he was. And war is never a good thing, but at some point you kind of gotta think about it objectively. Like, okay, the empire is expanding, and whenever you put like a capital E in front of empire in a fantasy world, you kind of figure out who the big bad is in that circumstance, right?
Whoever the Empire's fighting.
Right. And like, there is a quest sequence as part of the main story in Adargon where you do go and try to talk to Galul Jaja. And figure out what he's doing, because he does try to broker like peace treaties with other societies that also experience the Empire's wrath, even on like the mainland of Vana'diel and not just in Adargon. Because if you recall, Adargon is also like the expansion where we like take a vacation to the west. And find a new land with an empire and to fight a warmongering leader, right? We've talked about those parallels before.
Right.
But he also has that conversation with Luzov, who ends up being our big hero in Adargon as well, because Luzov's people were also victims of the Empire. And that was purely capitalistic greed. It is interesting, though.
Lusa is the male Mithra?
Luzov is no. That's
No.
Lako.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No.
Names.
You're totally fine. They're very complicated. Luzov is the Elvan prince who is incredibly dreamy. Lako Heboko is the blonde cat boy who is essentially like the person they ripped all of Emmett Selk's animations for. I don't know if I talked about this, but the last time you see Lako, he's been revived for one last conversation where he wishes you well on his way, and then he walks off and raises his right hand and flicks his wrist a few times, pretending to wave, and then he's gone.
Wow.
Like, I'm serious. I saw that and I was broken. He has this whole bit about falling asleep in trees after cryptically giving you information that you didn't know you needed.
So he
entirely
loves sleep,
unrelated to the Alliance raid.
Flamboyant waves.
Uh-huh.
He sounds like absolute cinema.
Yes, he is. He's great. Entirely unrelated to the Alliance raids, but I'm sure, like, if FF11 had come out now, there would be Lako fan cams all across Twitter. I guarantee it. Somewhat related to that, I guess one of the things that I wanted to share about the Alliance raid that I thought was fun is that there's like specific racial dialogue depending on what your Warrior of Light is when you go do the quests after the raid.
Ooh,
and there is an additional piece of dialogue if you are a male Mithra. Specifically, Prish says, "Wait, a male Mithra?" Well, now I've seen everything because they're so incredibly rare, and the only one that you ever see in the game is in Wings of the Goddess in some of the longest like city-state quests. It's very funny. Rugadin get asked where their tails are. Lalafell get asked why they're taller than most Tarutaru. It's very cute. So all of the races in 14 that came from 11 got special dialogue.
That's fantastic.
And
Except for the
they're boring.
And if you're Viera, Hrothgar, or Aura, then it's like, what the fuck are you? Or
yeah, it's just like, oh, a fellow adventurer. Because Aeneas is an Ara, right? So I didn't get anything special, so I didn't make note of that until my friend, who is like my FF11 guide. He's been a player since the game came out. He does play a male Mikote specifically because he saw Lako in 11 when Wings of the Goddess came out and was pissed that he couldn't play a male Mithra.
The models are in the game.
They weren't until the Wings of the Goddess expansion.
I know.
Yeah, which was, God, a few years into the life cycle. They were already winding down. But I don't know. I think it's fun. Even like again, I linked my thread, but a lot of the shades, they're a mix of things that players would very commonly shout in city-states, particularly Juno, or NPCs.
I saw that, yeah.
Who have iconic quests. Remember I talked about there's an NPC in Lower Juno where once a day you could light a lantern? They put that NPC in as a shade. Which is absolutely adorable. They've got quest givers, like the Moblin exchange. There's a Moblin in 11 in that exact spot where once a day it's like a roulette where you have a chance to get either like a basic food item or end game fully leveled gear.
Oh, that's kind of like a wide split.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the chances for one versus the other are a lot, right? But I love all the little touches they put in, because 14 players have been enjoying it, but like I've taken so many 11 veterans through it at this point, and I've never heard such joy in my life as seeing them experience this here for the first time.
I really wonder what the 11 community is making of the raid, specifically the 11 community that hasn't played 14.
I can find out if you want. I can work on getting that information for you.
Maybe later. But I think after that, I think the biggest surprise that everyone got from this was seeing Surreal Jaw again.
Right.
After assuming he was pretty much dead. And he drops a lot of lore bombs in this, and I do want to talk about that later, but I also want to talk about a lot of the stuff that pops up in the raid proper. So, like, the little notes that you find, especially in Talia, where it's just people complaining about stuff that they commonly complain about. I think one that stuck out to me was like, I gotta get to this place because I'm gonna be late for the spawn.
Yeah, that's the second note. Yeah, I can cover that real briefly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured for the raid itself, y'all just give me things. I wish Arden were here to bounce off of as well, and I could be like, yeah, here's what this is. So there's 3 notes that you can find in Tulia. Specifically, the part that we're in is the Ruan Gardens, which is like the outskirts garden portion of it, and it's obviously become super overgrown. I'm going to keep myself to the lore stuff, because if I start talking about the design, I will start crying. So the note that you found is the second one. That is someone who is about to miss a spawn. Back when Zealart was out, like, people spent most of their time in Ruan Gardens, either farming for XP, farming for gear. That was like the place to do things. So much like when an S rank spawns in 14 and you have to scramble to get there before everyone swarms it and takes it down, that happens pretty often in 11 as well. The difference there being that when something spawned in the overworld that required such a big group of people, that was 11's equivalent of endgame raiding. So imagine you had to wait for the spawn timer to do a pull of the thing that you have been trying to get for a super long time, and then somebody early pulls it and you have to wait another few days. Like,
I would be so mad.
Yeah, that level of it. The first note, which is easy to miss right when you teleport into Tulia, behind the stairs, right after the chests before you go up, there is a note about Byakko, which is one of the bosses that you can fight in the outskirts of Ruan in, I guess you would call it like an equivalent to a trial series.
Okay.
So they don't have too much deeper meaning beyond a side quest. They're not set up like the Four Lords or what have you. I think that was a fun note to add, specifically this patch, because Byakko is the Unreal that we got alongside the rest of the patch content. Yeah, right? It's a cute nod to that. And the last note is right before the Archangels, where someone talks about, oh man, I should not have tried to do that by myself. I have to wait a few days before I try again. I gotta find a party to group up with. I can't take all 5 of them at once. What the hell? Which is really funny. And I hope most people miss that one on their first time through so they can experience that shock for themselves and then go back to read that note and go, yeah, I just had that emotion myself.
That's
the thing with Byakko is quite interesting though, because we already had the theme of the troll withdrawal and the auspices being somewhat linked, that we still don't know exactly how, but we already have the team. It feels almost like as if the developers are being like, maybe if you haven't, maybe you should play the auspice storyline.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a nod culturally to the player base of 11, but it is also like an in-joke as far as the content itself. I think it works on so many levels. It's just really, really clever. It's a fun little Easter egg.
I like it. I will say I was surprised at at the and I know it's not super relevant, but someone saying, "Oh, I should go with the party next time," and I'm like, "But you could run with trusts."
You couldn't back in the day.
True, and I know that's
Yeah.
not the point. And like I said, this is more about the player experience of 11 rather than current state.
Well, even trusts too. Like, if you're doing content solo with trusts, you can do all of it that way. But you gotta be really smart with trusts too. It's like setting up gambits in 12, except you don't set up the gambit. You've got to like figure out what your optimal loadout is to start. If that makes sense. So
Yeah.
some healers are better in certain situations than others. Some tanks are better in certain situations than others. It's like Pokemon and types, except you have to know everything about the Final Fantasy enemy, because even an ad pack, you sometimes have to swap out trusts between ad packs based on what the mobs are.
Right.
And really know your own skill set too, as far as your own job goes. Like the content we've been doing recently, my friends and I, has required us actually to have Archangel Tarutaru out because he has an AoE that puts all enemies to sleep. And then you can single target dangerous mobs down one by one, because what we've been doing is they all spawn in a group and you can't fight them in a group.
Yeah.
So we have Archangel put all of them to sleep, and then we pick them off one by one and hope that we can do it before the sleep debuff wears off.
I will say, and the other part of that is making sure you have the right trusts that you need.
Exactly, and some trusts are way harder to get than others. Like the best healer, Mombaro, we talked about him a little already as well. He is time gated behind being an active player for like a year and a half.
Oh wow.
And it's not just like have an active subscription for that amount of time. No, it's like you've got to be like working towards this. You've got to be consciously doing it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
It is, but it's also a reward for like, hey, you clearly play this game a lot. Here is something so that you're not struggling with it if you're doing it alone, right? So it's a good enough system.
So we meet Prish.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Prish? Is this the Prish we had in 11, or is this some monstrosity?
Not to begin with. First of all, her fists are explained by the fact that Surreal gave them to her, which makes a lot of sense. They didn't just bossify her, I guess you could say. But we do get to see a bit from her perspective in that initial fight. She's been manipulated in some way. She thinks that the apparition of Galul Jaja is Olmia, whom we did talk about the last time we did 11 stuff. It's so nice that we did that episode, because I can be like, oh yeah, just go reference this. We don't have to take a tangent for 30 minutes. So she thinks Galul Jaja is Olmia, because of course, why else would she trust a stranger? And she thinks that we are Tauruses, which are basically demonic servants of whichever entity holds the most power at that point in time. So they're commonly seen in like the Shadow Lord's army. You see them in like deeper auspices of Prometheans, that sort of situation. Which is why she's fighting us. You'll notice after we defeat her as the first boss in the Alliance raid, she loses the fists, and Bakul Jaja carries her around like she's his younger sister. I love their sibling relationship so much. And she kind of comes around to herself, especially in the cutscenes after the fact. So I am of the opinion that Prish was manipulated in the beginning, and is not an apparition, per se, the same way that a lot of the rest of the raid is. Same thing with Alshal, we know he isn't an apparition. Prish, I could see being an apparition, but her personality is so strong that Surreal may still have had to trick her, because that's just kind of how much of a badass that Prish is. But I choose to believe that it's her because I like her and I want to see more of her.
See, I thought she was just mad at people born in May. Because I had no frame of reference for the Taurus thing. I was like, why?
So
Why is she mad
Oh,
at Taurus?
I was like, what does May have to do with it?
The Taurus zodiac sign.
I know, it took me a minute.
no, but Ayumi's still silent. I suppose he either is taking a long coffee or has fallen asleep making
Maybe
the coffee.
both. He fell asleep in his coffee.
maybe both. But I went through the unlock of the raid, and I was like, Ayumi, have you done so? And he was like, I'm at work, and okay. Then when you start, then you tell me. And a number of hours later, I get a ping in the server with the spoiler redact, and Ayumi basically, why the fuck does Bridge has aura sight visions?
I will say, I wouldn't equate it to anything related to that because that's just the name of the enemy type, in 11.
Yes, but
so it's. I know, yes. I get it, but the context matters in this case.
I know, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that they could be playing a double layer thing here. Because if you recall, in Ridorana, in the events of Ridorana, the aura sight that's being used with the whole scene of Bagamnan seeing the party as Guardians is the Taurus aura sight. So
yeah, so, that's fair. It's just context is going to change conception of this
but
quite a bit. So
but the thing is that doesn't mean that they could not be playing many layered references in here. Like sure, they're going to be referencing things that are from 11, but it can fan out.
That's true. I'm just trying to stay grounded in this because I am not trying to speculate right now. I am just explicitly stating we know what this is. Plain and simple.
I can bear the madcap if you.
So, no, that's totally fair. I'm just
to spare you from the madcapping. And to boot, and then later on, without skipping Priestess battle here, but there's the mob pack in the forest area, and I saw the adventurers around saying, "Let's go for Aquarius," and I'm like, "Are you fucking?"
So again, Aquarius is just the name of a normal notorious monster. Everything that you find in that ad pack is just normal notorious monsters. So it's. I know you like reading into things. This is just not one where I feel like that's where it is, because a lot of that was just references to the NMs. Same thing in Juno. A lot of the NPCs talk about that. Where's there's an NPC who gives you a quest to record data on the notorious Dale. Most of the ad packs here are references to that. Indeed, the first ad pack is the ads at the start of a Dynamis run as well. It's just a reference to previous quote-unquote endgame content in 11. It's hard to call it endgame because so much of it was outdated even at the time of release. But that is what a lot of the enemy types are coming from there, is nods to 11 raiding. Mm. Or what counted as raiding, rather. It's hard to call it that.
Did the crab Aquarius appear in the forest? Just a question.
I can't remember. Probably. But the Elder Gubo and Aquarius, they are just well-known notorious monsters.
Mm-hmm. Okay. No, I was basically asking because if the crab happened in the forest, then it would be more like a reference to something that happens in the area in the game. But if it was put in there for another reason, then that's when I start raising my eyebrows.
Yeah, no, it is just straight up there because it's an 11 thing. Same thing with Fafnir. The name Fafnir the Forgotten is really funny because Fafnir is like a placeholder spawn for Nidhogg. You could only spawn every 3 days. Nobody gave a shit about Fafnir unless it had a chance to spawn Nidhogg. That's why he's the Forgotten. Which is really, really funny.
Hilarious and sad.
Yeah, he did drop like riddle pages, which could be used for something else and got significantly more useful later. But like, that's what that's a nod to, is that nobody gave a shit unless it was Nidhogg time. And then Fafnir would be like, oh yeah, now we care about the spawn, and then everyone would fuck off again. Which is also kind of like the Boyata tree, how that kind of works out as well. It's related to that region. The Boyata tree is a place where you just kind of go to get useful gear. Like, I had to grind out some useful weapons in that region in 11 barely 2 weeks ago as well. It's still relevant. It's just a place where you go to fight very, very specific monsters when you need very, very specific gear.
Okay.
Which
No,
is...
but
No,
still,
go on.
it's still interesting, the connection between Fafnir and Nidhogg, considering the mythology behind Nidhogg being, the snake eating the roots. Well, not eating, but biting at the roots of the Yggdrasil. So
Yes.
yeah.
That's kind of where, like, we're starting to actually get a picture of where Adeline comes into 14. Because a lot of Adeline talks about, like, a world tree, but not in any specific regions. This is why Arden and I were so hesitant to talk about it, is because a lot of the Adeline stuff right now bears only a superficial connection. Like, there isn't much we can get into there. But that expansion does involve a whole lot of that sort of concept. So I'm starting to get an idea in my mind, and I know one day I'll wake up in a cold sweat and be like, I've cracked it! And put an essay in chat, right? But it is a good observation. The dragons kind of, in 11, they kind of like to seclude themselves away. Instead of doing the stereotypical protecting a horde thing, it's more like protecting natural spaces, which makes sense given their leader is Bahamut, who is the avatar of Altana tasked with kind of world protection, right? Naturally, his people would want to take up arms in that way as well.
That makes sense.
Okay.
I actually like that idea a lot more than a horde. It makes sense to me because, as far as, like, dragons don't have, in my estimation, a huge sense of economy. And things like precious gems and coins, but there is a sense of economy as far as, like, territory and land. So that makes a lot more sense to me.
And it's in 11, it's also a lot more that they just care about the world. So it's like, let's not just protect the land that we're sitting on, but let's protect this natural beauty. Let's protect this, like, stream that brings life to a lot of different regions. It's that kind of energy.
Right.
Like, they're genuinely, like, I don't know, think about them like Avalanche, if that helps.
Yeah. Oh, it's a great
So
I like it.
Oh, did you just see it?
Yeah.
It's my Odin quote.
I'm just snickering because all of many things that Aeneas is saying is actually fitting the speculation, but I don't really want to talk about it in this
we're gonna talk
stream.
about it. We're gonna talk about it.
And then, I guess, since we're just going through the fights in order, immediately after that, we'd get teleported to Tulia, Ruan Gardens. I don't...
Should we,
No, go on.
should we
Right.
talk
Right before that,
Dynamis, Juno?
I just want to say, when we go into that second area before we fight Fafnir, my very first reaction was, is this Zeta?
No! It's not grayscale enough.
I know. And there aren't any crystal pillars, but as far as I've gotten in 11, Zeta Sanctuary is my favorite area in the game so far.
Yeah, that's a weird one, because you kind of get sent there so early on because of Rhapsodies of Vana'diel, even though, like, you don't have enough context to understand Zeta until you get through Wings of the Goddess.
Right.
And even then, you're still kind of sitting there like, okay, but how did we get here specifically at this point in time?
And yeah, I'm in Rise right now, Rise of the Zillart, and I don't know what the fuck I'm doing there, but it's a really cool area. I like it.
So when it comes to, I mean, we going like from the beginning of the raid, we find ourselves in Dynamis Juno, I assume, and we fight we fight Prish, and off stream I was like, I wanted to pick Inez's brain about Prish and the whole battle lines. With because I was very much raising my eyebrows
yeah.
and so many.
Well, you should, yeah. Because Prish, what do you have the specific quote, Meowth?
Which one?
The one about Altana.
I can pull it up.
The one that stuck to me in my brain and in context is that one that she says, "You cannot stop the flood of mortal existence," and
Yeah.
and I was like, in the context of her being manipulated, and this fight, and the concept we've talked about the mortal existence. And using flood, using I was like,
it's loaded as hell.
I was like, immediate. Of course, first thing I came to think, this is a reference to the Sundering. Like, and
so it's more a reference to Promathia, right? Because her whole, which we talk about, we can kind of compare it to the Sundering, right? Because when man evolved into mortal existence, Altana basically had to put mortal values somewhere, and she made a god so depressed that he tried to end the world. I guess is the best way to describe it, right? And that's where we get Promathia from. So the flood of mortal existence is essentially referencing the mortality of man as it relates to what Promathia embodies. And that was the expansion that Prish was introduced in. So that line is her, like, dialed up to 26. The one where I'm like, this is extremely out of character for her, is the one where she praises Altana. I'm like, Prish does not give a shit about Altana. Like, she recognizes that Altana is, like, the goddess, but Altana's religion is also the one who put her behind bars, who, like, abused her for her entire life. She doesn't have any veneration for a god who would do this. Like, she fought her battles, but that was all her, and she didn't do it for Altana. It seems incredibly out of character that she would be like, oh yeah, in the name of Altana, you'll be smited, or whatever the line is. I'm like, no, Prish would never do that. She'd say that she's enjoying beating you up herself for her own purposes, not the name of Altana.
That's fair.
Oh, Yumi, welcome back.
Yes.
Did you get coffee?
Yes, too much of it.
That explains things.
One thing I did want to point out, though, that kind of threw me for a loop is the battle arena for the Prish fight. That's not 11. That's from the fucking peaks in 14. So I've been poking around there, and some of those structures that the Kikern have set up, they are very similar to
the cigarette.
Yeah, the ziggurat, right? So some of the structures set up they do herald back to some of the, for lack of a better term at this point, unfortunately, Beast Tribe encampments in 11. But poking around the area still, they've also got floating blue crystals that have the same kind of basic shape as the floating crystals that we see in the Walk of Echoes access points in 11. I don't know what to make of that yet. I am still working on a theory for that, but it is interesting to see that correlation, because that's the one thing in the Alliance raids that isn't like, yeah, we know what that is. I'm sitting here like, what's the further connection here? So that's one that you could go to town on, Meowth, if you want.
So that's interesting too, because the cigarette is something so interesting. you know my theory that we're going backwards in expansions. Right now we are at quote unquote Shadowbringers, and we're going to go backwards into Stormblood, coming from into 8.0. Which is why I'm going through the whole reference to Stormblood with quite the interest right now. Also because MSQ of Stormblood is really difficult for me to digest because I cannot stand Liz and the glorifying of Revolution, but. But there's so many things in Stormblood that are crucial to the story of 14, and it's one of those stories that kind of that do not seem so lore charts, but then you start digging a bit, and there are many things that are a bit like weird.
It's exposition.
Like, yeah, and the cigarette, for example, I remember going through the cigarette, and well, I don't know. A cigarette is basically a Mesopotamian, I don't know, whatever, pyramid in a sense, which is interesting to me that it's like that it's if you go to the peaks and you go to the cigarette, you will see that's actually a pyramid built and another one upside down over it. That's not exactly a cigarette. The cigarette is a pyramid in steps, very similar to Mexican pyramids, in fact. Which in fact this is referenced in Shadowbringers. In the quest in which we go to open the Kitana Ravel, and we first go to the Morning Stars, the 4 pyramids that control the temple from which we go through the Indiana Jones instance, and if you talk to Yestola, she mentions that the structures are very similar to the cigarette in the peaks, and that they seem to be controlling the flow of ether that flows towards the Kitana Ravel, which is something quite interesting. If we're making assumptions that these sort of structures like pyramids and the cigarettes are working as some form of ether regulation systems.
Right. I looked at the scroll work too. The scroll work in the Alliance raids is different to what we see in the peaks. However, it is significantly more similar to that which we see on Ronkin structures. Same thing where when we go through the dungeon whose name I keep forgetting, but involves Ronkin architecture on the source as well.
Tender Valley.
Tender Valley. So there's definitely something there that we need to be keeping an eye on, because this is too many times for it not to be incredibly relevant at some point.
If you make me go into Tender Valley, you're going to get a massive lore run from me after doing a bit quote unquote.
Believe me, I'm also right there with you.
Not because of Ronka necessarily or the shard, but because of things that were exposed to us in side quests in Shadowbringers.
Yep.
And it's like
I know.
And it's like yeah, and then the conclusion of the quest when you go into the Tender Valley, and it's like, okay, there's a reason why we now have an evolution zodiac emote in the server. No, really, I'm not kidding. I laugh, but I'm not kidding at all. But anyways, that's another story. Another thing that I kind of realized there, and I noticed a theme, because it so happens that yesterday I was doing roulette and I got Puppet's Bunker. So the second Neo raid. Second fight, where you fight the three flying units, yes, and they do the swipe with the light blades, with the energy blades.
Yeah, the fun one where you can wipe out the other groups.
Yeah, when you can so you can massacre the other raid teams. Yeah, so when they do the sweep, and I realized that they have the same colors in the blades as precious rings, or colors used to determine how far she's going to punch you.
Oh,
and it's yellow or golden, amber, and violet. All three of them of these colors are in the Prish fight as in the near
So-
in the colors of the blades. This is a color scheme I'm seeing repeated and again.
So let me just that's a mechanical thing. Have you done any of the Criterion or Criterion Savage content as
No.
well? Yeah,
No, I
so
haven't.
they repeat that pretty regularly whenever you have a sequence of 3. So that's a mechanical accessibility thing that the game does.
Yeah, but it so happens that those colors are the color of golden, associated kind of like with the word of light there. Amber, which is the color of Hasem, and violet, which is the color of Emetzelk. So I'm seeing that I'm seeing that pattern repeated so many times right now. I'm like, okay, I'm going to take note of that because it seems to be a very deliberate color scheme there.
Basically, Meowth is going to Madcap again.
Yeah,
It's the life of my story.
I know, just gently like.
Sorry, no, not the life.
I know.
The story of
I
my
know,
life.
I get it. I just like, as someone who is visually disabled and relies pretty heavily on the few accessibility things that they do in game, this is a mechanical choice that makes it possible for me to raid.
It's fine.
Sometimes game design is like that. I'm just letting you know that's why that sort of stuff usually happens mechanically.
It's
well,
like that because it's like that.
Yep. And a lot of 11 stuff is just like, this is how it is, and we ask questions, and then we don't get answers, and they give us more content that is strange, and then we have to ask more questions, and we never get answers, because that's how 11 works.
well, I'm here to Madcap, so.
I love it. I just the accessibility thing means a lot to me as a raider because it makes it so that I am able to play the game sometimes, especially in super visually dense fights, which, man, just a second, like the mechanics of all of the combat in the 11 raid, it made me so happy. Like, it really felt like we went back to tactics level of design and with the voice acting too. I don't know if y'all picked up on it, but it made me so happy. I thoroughly enjoy the production value.
So
right. So when it comes to Prish invoking Altana, that's we've established that this is a very out of character situation. What do you make of Prish making the comment in battle that, like, I don't know exactly what's the prompt, but she basically says, "Hey, there's no way you have her blessing too."
Yeah. So that is a literal thing that happens in 11. She is quote unquote blessed by Altana, and she perceives it as a curse because she kind of shares Promathia's burden. This very specifically evokes parallels to like Heidelin's Blessing of Light, but in a really, really paltry way. I've joked about this off the air as well, but there's so many dialogue options here that kind of put Altana and Heidelin on a power structure where Altana is just so much higher above in all in all of her stats. I said this to Arden, but if they entered a fist fight, there's no way that Altana's walking out of there without being the victor, honestly, at this point. So that's kind of how I'm choosing to interpret a lot of this. But her, gemstone that Prish has on her outfit, that is, a symbol of Altana that protects her and is, a physical manifestation of her blessing and her ability to face down Promathia at the end of the fight. So Prish does get a certain modicum of what makes her a hero from Altana, but she is not defined by it, and she actively kind of makes herself. She takes her fate into her own hands. She's like, yeah, I got these powers from a goddess, but that doesn't mean that she's a blind devotee to her, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where that's coming from.
Okay, noted.
So I like that, because if we look at Heidelin, she was never really a true goddess. She was considered a goddess by modern day people just because we didn't know any better. But she was always just a primal and not a very powerful one, considering everything at that. She was designed to do one specific thing, which was enervate and contain Zodiark. and by doing that sundered the world. And so she gave the impression that she was powerful, but you know, a team of 8 rapscallions came in and kicked her ass. So
She served her purpose,
Yeah, she
right?
did.
And that's at the end of the day, that's all icons do, is they serve their purpose.
Right.
They're not true gods. None of them ever have been.
Right. And I get the impression that Altana has never been killed by a raid of people in 11.
No,
Yeah,
never.
so-
God, I wish. God, you know how badly I want that, though, Cobb? Like, this was the thing I said going into Endwalker. People were surprised you and I had this conversation back when we first met, where we were shocked. People, like, oh, Zodiark's not the final boss? Like, I'm surprised we fought him at all.
Yeah.
I went into Endwalker, like, being like, please let me kill Hydaelyn. Please, please, please.
Same.
You never really get that moment with Altana in 11, but you do just kind of respect that she is a force to be reckoned with, and the ways that you kind of fight against that force are like, no, you can't just eat timelines whenever it suits you. No, you can't just let people be racist. That's not good.
Mhm.
Like, you fight against the societal things that she has established rather than the god itself. And I think that that's such a powerful narrative too, right? Because you're not... Societal change doesn't come with taking down one person. It comes with dismantling the entire system.
Right.
And that's what 11 does really, really well as far as its storytelling
So
goes.
it
makes it a personal human story.
It's very much the story of fuck God, but in a more less like it, which is interesting because it introduces the concept of, if you dismantle the power or the establishment of the rules of a god, then that god will, no matter how hard they may try, they will be powerless over humans.
Theoretically, yeah.
That's a very interesting theme to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
For the coming arc of 14, I would say.
I wholeheartedly agree. And let me be clear, they never outright say, yeah, Altana is a villain, but there are so many points in every expansion where you're like, yeah, and then Altana did this thing. Anyways, we should fix that. And they never, like, specifically say, maybe we should stop Altana from doing these things in the first place. They always give us that information and then pivot. So they never outright call her the villain, but it's impossible to play the game and not be like, okay, why is Altana doing all of these things though? Like, she's
so like
causing
Hydaelyn,
problems.
exactly like Hydaelyn.
Right. Except significantly more powerful and less human.
Mm-hmm.
On that note, though, can I shift to some of the dialogue that Surreal Jaw has? Because I think it's relevant.
You're gonna
in
open up that
discussing
can of
Hydaelyn.
worms?
I am absolutely going to do that.
All right, let's get into that.
So the specific dialogue is from when Surreal Jaw is kind of monologuing at us in the final quest. What I found when I dragged myself across the threshold was an emptiness. A space beyond time. It was there in this dark expanse that I beheld another world. And what a wondrous weave it will be, made possible by the endless possibilities gleaned in that walk of echoes. The memories buried there, those remnants of echoes, will shape my dreams into reality. That is loaded with so much specific quotation from both 11 and 14 that it hurt my brain.
Yeah.
Trying to parse it out, because that first line about the emptiness is the thing which Promathia symbolizes. Darkness is very much Odin's thing. Like, we talk about Hydaelyn and Zodiark not being true gods. If we want to give a true aspect to darkness, that would be Odin. The same way that, like, a true aspect to light would be Alexander. They are inherently intertwined in that way. In this dark expanse, I beheld another world. He's talking about peering into the Walk of Echoes, which we've discussed is a place where realities meet. And then he talks about the Walk of Echoes as being remnants of echoes in the specific language that we talk about in 14 about us perceiving memories in the past.
Mm-hmm.
This has basically fundamentally tied the ether physics of both worlds together, and I didn't have to redraw a single diagram from either game, which terrifies me on multiple levels. But the implication here is that the expanse between shards can be conceived of as the Walk of Echoes, which again, we're talking about the power structure between Altana and Hydaelyn, where in this comparison, Hydaelyn is a pretty paltry copy.
Yeah.
We know that the Echo in 14 is also not something that comes from Hydaelyn. It was just kind of something she utilized.
Correct.
If we're establishing that the Echo is this thing that we don't understand that is greater than us, but we're also establishing that the Echo is related to the Walk of Echoes, as in like a hall of memories that we can kind of peruse. We have now equated memory with reality, with Hydaelyn stealing powers from an actual god and using them really, really poorly. It was just, my brain like folded it over itself trying to put all of that together. Like, knowledge is a burden.
Which, you know what? I like that because that kind of resolves the bootstrap paradox of Hydaelyn.
It does. It does. And they do it so well, because I had commented on this a few months ago, where I am no longer worried for the future of 14 as far as discussing multiple realities and stuff goes, because of the way that they tied it up in Wings of the Goddess. Because it's an illusion. It is a malicious illusion, but it is one that you can fight against by taking your fate into your own hands. They've just directly linked it to that specific part of the story in 11.
I feel so vindicated.
It's beautiful. I love it. It's gorgeous.
That does make me feel better as well. It makes me feel like, you know, there's outside influence now on the reality of 14. And I feel like we're going to learn a lot more about what the rift is, because we know about the shards, we know about the void. We don't know anything about the rift other than it's extremely chaotic.
Right.
But we know it's huge, and we know that there are things in it.
The hard part about this is that it very firmly places Vana'diel as one of two things. It's either another shard, which, again, it would make sense if you peer into the Walk of Echoes and see another shard.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the bridge between shards, right? So it's fully plausible that that is the case. The other scarier notion is that it's what came before.
Ooh, okay. Elaborate.
Well, we've talked about the timeline of 11 being so much more vast than the one that we've experienced in 14.
Mm-hmm.
If the Walk of Echoes is where realities go to die, who's to say that there wasn't the entirety of the 11 reality has collapsed in some sort of Big Bang? A la maybe a calamity that kickstarted the actual world of 14?
Okay.
I mean, could be.
Yeah, because it's... The hard part about this is not knowing whether or not Vana'diel is a shard, right? Because if it's not a shard, we have to look at something more grandiose.
So
Otherwise,
yeah.
Surreal Jaws is going on the worst acid trip of his life, which I don't think that's the case.
I am hesitant to say that Vana'diel is a shard. I know it's a possibility. I'm hesitant to go down that road just because, one, there are still different mechanics about how things work in 11.
Exactly.
But also that it's... I don't know. It feels like it would be minimizing 11 to just make it a part of 14.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where I'm like, that was purely like, these are some of the options because we don't have enough information on it yet, and I'm hoping we get more in the next Alliance raid, which I'm craving it for like my ether physics diagrams, because I'm eating shit up, but also I want to see more of 11. The Alliance raids were so good. Give me more of it.
And they were.
Do you know
nice
something?
hard.
No, Do you know something that I actually like about the theory of it being the world of the existence before to the universe of 14? Because of Atheris, we actually don't know that much of its history. We even don't know the origins of Atheris or how the ancients came to be. I suppose that I can say that we eventually will get to that, but not right now. But the implication that, for example, 11 at some point imploded and something new from it came. That, coming from Endwalker and Ultima Thule, is so interesting because the Ea were so terrified of the universe going kaboom or going into heat death. And
Exactly.
this, if Vana'diel had imploded in some form and later reborn from its ashes like the phoenix, then that would contradict the whole thing of the nihility of death.
Yep, and that what makes that so interesting is so much of like the Aya's story and their iconography. It's Promethean. It's some of the same symbolism that we see in like old Zealert structures, because the whole Zealert thing was one of the ways they tried to stave off their inevitable like passing of the baton to mortal creatures was leaving their bodies and becoming only souls, never to return to physical form, doomed to wander listlessly through the halls of their grand creations until they perished.
Well, that's depressing.
Does that sound similar to the Aya?
and also sounds similar though with little differences to the Endless.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the other thing too. They use such intentional language with Cerealja because they're talking about the emptiness, which is inherently Promethean. The emptiness also being something referenced by the End Singer when talking about her perceived end of the world. But Cerealja also talks about endless possibilities gleaned by the Walk of Echoes to exist outside of time, outside of reality, in death and in undeath. Thematically, that is what the Endless in Dawntrail were. Again, comparing that to what happened to the Zealert, right? Because we've discussed that when we went through the Dawntrail story. There's so many layers to this.
But yes, there's more because this is where I come in, because endless possibilities, the concept of not life but also not death, is the exact concept of Valhalla in Final Fantasy 13 too. It's a world of endless possibilities.
Yeah, I love it. There's so much here that's like, we've cracked it, but we're all insane.
So it only kind of reinforces my impression that the riff is something like the Void Beyond. In 13.2, not going to bother you with the details over there on there, but we do have at some point to have an episode on Fabula Nova Crystal.
Yes, it sounds like we need it.
So yeah, and yeah, I'm the thing going a bit into MSQ, but not into. I mean, but it feels like related. The whole thing with the Sildert and the Endless. It feels like an interesting take or reverse situation, because the Sildert were like, I don't know if they were immortal or long-lived, I don't know. You told me that. But in this case, that we're seeing this situation going on in Everkeep, in Alexandria, it's actually mortal people growing fearful of death, so they try to escape death. So there's already an inversion there at play.
Yeah, so the Zealert were immortal and then became long-lived. Their civilization was declining, and Altana posed it as an evolution. That's why the Kalu existed, because the Kalu were Zealert who embraced that. And then there were last bastions of Zealert who were like, no, we don't want this. Which would be Conlanot and Eldonarsh kind of heading that up, right? But the Kalu included Ashantarl, or Cardinal Mildarian. She's kind of like Prish's mentor. Ironically, also a follower of Altana who made herself immortal. Nagmalata was pissed that he wasn't allowed to be the person who did that, because fundamentally he still agreed with the Kalu on their morals. He just wanted to live forever so that Bahamut wouldn't be alone. Like,
Uh-huh.
he was like, why did you... Ishintaro was like, I'm gonna lay in the chamber of Eventide, I will become immortal so that I can carry, like, our burden for eternity. It will be such a sacrifice. I wish to be mortal, I wish to be Kalu. And Nagmalata is like, I'm right here. I would have done... What do you mean sacrifice? I would have done this willingly. What are you on about? It's great political, like, drama as far as the 11 story goes, but it is so goddamn tragic when you think about it from Nagmalata's perspective. Yeah, that was the one part of the Alliance raid where I'm like, I didn't see my boy.
There's still time.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's like, Prish has mentioned Olmia by name. She's mentioned that she's brushed shoulders with a whole bunch of people from Juno. She talks about Aldo and the Tenshoto by name. She has a line about Al-Shal where she thinks about where she possibly could have interacted with him. And she mentions a vague her. I don't think that she's talking about Olmia in that sentence. I think she's talking about Aishan Tarl, or rather Cardinal Mildarian, as Prish knew her, because she kind of had a pseudonym to pretend to not be Kalu. Because if you're Zealot or Kalu, you've always got an apostrophe in the name. That's how that works. So if you have a name without an apostrophe, surely you're not Zealot. That's the best way to make a disguise, right? Is you just pick a name without an apostrophe. It's a whole thing. But Prish has dialogue that says, meaning Al-Shal must have been there with her, but I don't remember ever hearing about that. Prish and Olmia were kind of inseparable. I believe that in this bit of dialogue, she's talking about Mildarian, who is also the person who gave Prish that amulet that she wears that is associated with Eltana's blessing. So I feel like we'll see Kalu later, but I am fully aware that half of that is wishful thinking because I miss my boy Nagmalata. I miss him. I need him. I need him back.
I mean, I want him to be so I can have proper references to draw you that portrait of him.
I look forward to it. He's gonna be on my holiday card this year, by the way. I'm shooting that this weekend. Y'all will all get one if you want one.
So
Absolutely not.
one thing though, I mean, I assume that this is how Tulia, the gardens are represented in 11. But again, talking about overlapping things, the circular rainbows there in the sky. I'm like,
yeah, it's related to kind of the way that Memoria della Stono Distant Worlds references it, because that is the Song of Prophecy. The symbology of that song is very purposefully integrated into the environment of Tulia and other Promethean zones, specifically during the Chains Promathia expansion. So they've taken those elements and just made them really, really beautiful in 14 as well. Also, someone in chat says the vague her is the adventure player character, I think, because it changes in those sentences. I will have to verify that.
It does change.
It does change. It does. That is interesting. Because immediately prior to that, they're not talking about something where you would be involved. So that's fascinating. If 11... We can talk about that when we talk about Al-Shal's identity, because there's a few options. Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah,
so
it's been a topic of debate, to say the least.
Yeah, I have evidence for multiple theories, but the TLDR is that we can't say anything definitively yet.
Yeah, that's the quicksand, as I mentioned, as I referred to, not solid ground. Then, well, I was mentioning rainbows because of P told us, considering things and all that, but yeah,
right, and the general theming of Dawn Trail as well, right? Because again,
yeah, which is concerning.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little bit. Like, so much of living memory is essentially what Tulia is in the 11 context. It's this place where souls and living things don't necessarily equate with being alive. we've pretty firmly established that rainbows are now associated with that idea. So it really is nice to see that in Tulia proper in 14 graphics. I think it's a nice touch. Because it's the same thing that we've seen in 11. I promised I wouldn't wax too much poetic on like the graphics of it, but Tulia really just took my breath away.
No,
They
it's
did
beautiful.
it so much
It's
justice.
beautiful, yeah.
And I
And I-
will say I was never a huge fan of Zillart architecture in 11, but seeing it rendered in 14's engine really was something else. And I was like,
It's
okay,
just
now I can
breathtaking.
get behind this.
Yeah. I love it. I would love to see the crags in 14 graphics too, because the way that they are designed, this is in the art book that I have as well. It is purposefully designed to look like human bones connecting to each other. It's supposed
Like
to be
the towers!
unsettling. Yeah. It's supposed to be unsettling. And you can see some of the architecture in Origenics as well, the dungeon, particularly the hallway on the fight to the last boss. That's what it's like being inside of a crag. So we do have kind of an approximation of it.
Okay.
Like the towers! Speaking of Tulia and specifically the arena in which we fight the archangels, there's a lot of hexagons there, and I mentioned this because Ayumi and I have been going after the hexagons in the dungeon and overall Solution 9 that seems that we suppose they're associated with preservation. So yeah, it's like
I spent the entire afternoon going through that.
yeah.
Also
So-
doing some things that I'm not too proud of.
So those designs, that was pretty consistently how you clicked into instances in 11, because you didn't have like a duty finder or something. I was actually kind of upset that you didn't have to click on the teleporters in Tulia to get them to activate, or click on the hexagonal stuff to enter, because anytime you saw that in 14, not 14, the coffee, I didn't have enough. In 11,
yeah.
in Tulia, that was a sign that you had to click on it to interact with it.
I didn't mean those hexagons. Let me see. I know I took the shots of the arena.
I think you're meaning the ones in the dungeon and such.
No. In the of course, this. Let me.
In the Laloff Amphitheater?
Yeah. Let me see, because I know I took shots of it. Oh, this is so. I have so many things from Endwalker because I'm doing a rerun. It was a really, really good patch. Yes. This. I have this folder full of Endwalker stuff because I'm doing a rerun of it and having a meltdown. By the way, so
That's the normal.
it's actually my default my default state
mood.
of mind. Yeah, being having a meltdown.
I mean, it's easy. I just nudge you in the right direction.
Yeah.
And I will forever grateful for it because I was so close to having given up on 14 if it wasn't for you. So.
You're welcome.
So, where the fuck do I have this? This is what happens when I don't label my screenshots, which.
Yeah, I had to do that too after Dawn Trail.
Let me see if I can find. I'm kind of dragging you guys. Sorry, go on if you want.
No, you're good.
While
I
I
mean-
find
Fun
this thing.
I can comment on the Laloff Amphitheater for a bit, because that was the instance that I was most hoping that we would get / looking forward to. The reason being is that the Archangels were like the fight. Divine Might is where you face all of them together instead of facing all of them individually. I wanted that, but I didn't want it to be an ad pack because it would be doing the Archangels such a disservice, considering how iconic they are and how iconic that fight is. The way they put that together was so good because they somehow managed to give you the FF11 combat experience with 14 mechanics. I don't know if any of you have died to their insta-kill abilities that have to be interrupted
Yes,
or
Meteor
slept.
and the
Yeah.
other one.
Yep.
So that was an exact same thing that would happen in 11. You would want to take down the Tarutaru first because he'll cast Meteor. If you let the Hume or the Mithra power up too much, they would have scaling like damage up increases that you eventually would not be able to survive. Like, all of it was put together so well. And the Loloth Amphitheater is where the Divine Might instance happens in 11 as well. And it's the same arena, it's the same music, but in such a beautiful arrangement. They did that fight justice in a way that I am having a hard time describing, but I did, like, sit there. That was the only part of the fight where, like, I was sitting there silently crying. Until the end where I screamed that was the most beautiful thing in the world.
See, I also silently cried
they did
because
so
we,
good.
we kept not interrupting Meteor and dying to it.
My
Figures.
first run wasn't so bad. There was one run where, on day one, where we had to run out the instance timer. There was like 2 minutes left by the time we finished the last boss. Like, we were so close. The Alliance figured out pretty quickly that I knew what I was doing, so I got the Danger Dorito. Everyone was like, "All right, let's follow Aeneas." I've been the Danger Dorito many a time, but never have I had all the players try to stack directly on top of me at every point in a fight, to the point I could not see Aeneas, I could not see the Danger Dorito. I had a vague sense of where she was because of the crowd, but we were packed together like sardines on the last fight. They were like, "Please get us through this." I'm like, "I got you." Your
Yeah, that
life
last
is
fight
in
was
my hands.
Brutal. Oh my god.
Oh, it's so good though.
It was.
Okay. So that one, I do want to talk about the Shadow Lord a little, because they voiced him. And they did it so poetically. Like, people are like, "Wow, he's such a brute. Why does he speak so eloquently?" I'm like, he's a poet. They let him speak like a poet because he is a poet. Which was wonderful. It made me so happy. I loved his eloquence, his diction. It was wonderful. What was fun about the Shadow Lord fight is it references not just the fight in the base game with the Magicite and the Throne Room. The armored version of the Shadow Lord, you only see him when you go back to view a battle in Wings of the Goddess during the actual Crystal War. So you see him not just as he appears in the base game, when you awaken him from his slumber, he actually returns to his full strength and puts on his armor, and when the arena changes all around him, you can see the scene in 11 where that happens, because you're no longer in the throne room, you were in a snowy, desolate place filled with ash. It's the city that he's raised, which is so cool that they blended those different parts of the Shadow Lord together, because he's such a badass in Wings of the Goddess. Like, you don't just wake him up and kill him. Like, he shows up on the battlefield and it's like this huge, strategic, well-designed cutscene. The battle music is epic. All of the custom animations for that part are incredibly epic. It's brilliantly done. I adored it. I was going somewhere with this, and then my brain got distracted thinking about the Shadow
We're
Lord.
talking about Shadow Lord armor.
I like the Shadow Lord. He's fun. He's pretty. Oh,
And he's eloquent.
the buff. Yes, the buff. Have any of you clicked on the buff that he gets when he puts the armor on?
No.
Yes.
Yeah. Here. Ooh. I'm glad you have, Meowth.
You bet I was looking at
I
everything.
know.
Like...
I know. So he's the Shadow Lord, right? The reason he's called the Shadow Lord is because you find out retroactively that he gained that power from Odin, who, as we've mentioned earlier, is like the true aspect of darkness, if we were to give it like an actual god. The buff that he gets when he puts the armor on is the Lord Unshadowed.
Mm-hmm.
I just... it gave me shivers, because it has like the connotations of like the unsundered, like being unshadowed, free from Odin's influence while retaining power. That's inconceivable. It's just so cool. I loved it. I don't know what the implications of that are. It could just be a purely aesthetic thing, because it's like, oh, it's the Shadow Lord. What if he became the Lord Unshadowed, right? But in 14 context, it's just such a neat touch. I love it so much. I'm going to start introducing myself as M Unshadowed instead of Unsundered. It's great.
Unshadowed.
You've entered Meowth's world.
Has... I mean, Unshadowed depends on how you understand it. It basically, if you understand Unshadowed as shadowless, then it would be the same as Asian.
Yep.
So
Yep. I know, and I love it so much.
and
Meowth like,
and
join the crowd. I've been here forever.
no, but listen, I have also been going into 16 because again, it's the brainchild of creative business unit 3. So you have to, and I bet there's many things from 14 that there's in 16 that 16 sounds like a declaration of intentions for this story arc of 14, really, and and there's certain lyrics when it comes to Titan in particular, Earth again, that refer to severing man from his hooded past.
Yep.
And it made me think of one of my theories that the ancient society was has this likely forgotten by now societal hood and mask things as to protect themselves, their identity, because of Ultima's games.
It gets. Oh, can I make? I'm about to make your brainworm so much worse, Meowth.
Baby.
So, because we've talked so much about this kind of connection, right? Tying like the Asians to this thematically, just with shadows and darkness. If the idea, again, speculative territory here, I need to preface this with that. Tying, how do I want to phrase this? If we assume that Vana'diel would be a predecessor, right, and we're putting Altana higher on the structure of like power scaling, it would imply that there is in fact some sort of actual god in our universe, which I'm not a religious person by any means, but for the sake of this argument, we're putting that there. I love the idea of a true aspect of darkness, in this case being Odin, because that would also elevate him to that higher plane, because he's also someone you never fully confront in 11. But he is possibly the only person who, like, or only being, rather, that could directly oppose Altana and win in an uncontested battle, because Odin is just so suffused throughout everything. Where Odin gets introduced in 11 is through a man resurrected from the dead in order to restore his civilization. Which is also, yeah, that's Luzov. So I was about to make Meowth a whole lot worse. Because if we're bringing that connection in, you could just, again, tie that to where the story in 16 comes in, right? It's the recurring theme of, let's restore our dead civilization through this sort of aspect. I just think it's fascinating to tie all of that together. Again, no idea if any of this is actually connected, but thematically, the fact that it keeps coming up, I love it. It's so intricate.
So
I am also an Odin fangirl.
A question though, because Odin is the aspect of darkness in 11. Then Alexander is, what kind of being is Alexander in
Light.
11?
He is light.
Yeah, I know that, but as in story background when it comes to Alexander.
He is ancient technology that they're not entirely certain where he came from. But he is also a servant of Altana. It is strange that he is mechanical in that sense. But essentially, their story together is that if Odin and Alexander are in the same room, they start creating Ragnarok, which is an apocalypse that no one has ever recovered from. It's one of the few apocalypses that has never happened to the point where Altana had to reset a timeline.
That sounds like an awesome party, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's some of the best music in the game. And this is like, I don't know how to phrase this, because we've talked about Altana resetting timelines before, right?
Yeah.
Alexander being a function of time, because I don't think we've seen the last of him in 14. Being in the same room with Odin causing Ragnarok, which is an apocalypse that we don't understand what it will do. However, me being Danish, I have a bit more of attachment to that word. Ragnarok is not the end of the world. It is the birth of a new one. You can't see what I'm doing with my hands, but it does tie back to this theme that we're having of like resetting the world, right? So I'm wondering if that's something that Ragnarok maybe is actually capable of doing, is birthing a new world. Because as far as I'm concerned, 11 and to a certain extent 16 actually are the best interpretations of Odin as a concept that I have seen outside of like my own culture, because
Meowth
usually
is-
it's not interpreted very well.
Meowth's having a seizure right now.
Yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
I knew I was gonna make her brainworms worse, but there it is. I'm just laying it out on the table.
I know really at this point I'm so creeped out because I'm like when the patch came out I was like I have not yet to correct anything from my fucking flowcharts I did back in
Right?
May,
It's scary.
and everything seems to just add up to the theory that all the unholy file. For now I haven't had to scratch anything, so at this point I'm kind of really scared that it is like at this point I either hit the nail on the head or I'm just so high on copium. There's not going to be in between.
Well, this is kind of the fun part of the Alliance raid that they've set up, right? Is because of the way that they've established this, we're getting the highlights of all of the best fights while still getting the lore as it relates to 14. And I guess this is kind of where we can get into Al Shal as well, because I mentioned, we talked earlier that we never actually get a chance to fight Altana because they just kind of be like, yeah, she did this thing, and then we moved on. The same can be said for Odin. You can fight him, but only as like an overworld avatar to get him as a summoner, because if you're a summoner in 11, part of the functionality of that is you had to beat the icon in an instance in order to get them as a summon, and they would release those in subsequent patches, right? So that's kind of why he's there for that. But you never fight him as part of the story. I would love for like the final arc of the Alliance raid to be like, oh yeah, Odin was involved this entire time. He's the big bad we should be fighting, because it would be an iconic cameo from 11, but putting that classic 14 twist on it too. I think that would be brilliant.
Yeah, but at the same time, I don't think they're going to make anything related to darkness be bad again, because it would be a bit like a repeat. And it seems to be the story seems to be putting the light as our enemy this time. But the other thing I wanted to comment is that you were mentioning Alexander and Odin. I was like, those are the Eidolons of the leading pair of Final Fantasy 13. So
yeah, it's what I'm learning is 13 drew heavy inspiration from 11 at this point.
I mean, it makes sense.
It does. It's good story.
So
do we want to talk about Al Shal while we have time?
Sure.
Yeah.
So Al Shal is weird. We have a few options with him. One, and this seems to be the one that people are agreeing on, that's kind of hard to like corroborate because we don't have any more information right now, is that he is the insert for a player character. He has dialogue that implies that this is the case. The gear set that he's wearing is something that players can get themselves. However, he could also be an NPC that we just haven't identified yet. I personally am not leaning that route, but I also am not a fan of the idea that he would be a player character insert. And the reason that this is also on the table is because he has dialogue that implies that he fought the Shadow Lord in that fight that I was talking about earlier in Wings of the Goddess, which would be 20 years prior to the events of FF11. As they played through, it implies that he was on the battlefield there. The fact that Prish does not recognize him is also kind of a huge red flag, because Prish would know you as the adventurer. So again, this could be that they are both creations and Prish's personality is strong enough that she would still have to be tricked. But the fact that Al Shal was found in the cenote and Surreal Jaw kind of was like, oh yeah, you just kind of were a mistake, I didn't pay attention to the details, implies that he is actually from Vana'diel. But if he's not a player character, and he's not a super important NPC that we've recognized at this point, maybe he's a stand-in for someone that we haven't seen yet. Or an icon, as it would have it, because the name Al-Shal, meaning adventurer, has a few connotations. The root of which can tie back to Alexander if you're looking at the right Latin translations.
Interesting.
I was thinking because if the storylines already referenced by the original adventurer by he or she, because that's how they do that with the Way of Light or Asim.
Right.
And Al-Shal is different, and also has kind of adventurer vagabond. The proper word that's as Bakul Jaja mentions is actually vagabond, but
Yep.
he basically says you can translate it if you want to adventurer. But the real concept is basically errant, if you will, vagabond. So that's interesting too, because if there's another person that the raid identifies as the player character in 11, then I wonder if maybe I don't know, maybe Al-Shal was something like a party member for the player character. I don't know, it's just an idea.
Yeah, it's because we've seen in the past that the 14 team is hesitant to make a visual representation of you that isn't yourself, and we've talked about how much of a detriment to the story it would be if we actually saw Azim. I know Cobb and I have talked about this extensively, that it would, like, everything would fall apart if they did that. It would be weird for them to do that for 11 and be like, here's a stand-in character for this other MMO that everyone ascribes just as much personality and attachment to their personal OCs as they do in 14. It would feel inconsistent with the quality of the writing, especially with the level of quality put into the rest of the Alliance raids, which is why I'm not leaning in that direction as far as who Al-Shal is. I'm not discounting it entirely, because there's a lot about him that does point in that direction, but I think writing-wise, it wouldn't make as much sense. I like the idea that he could potentially be someone in the party, Meowth, especially because we talked about how much he looks like if Vana'diel were goth. Vana'diel being a really, really iconic, I've said that a lot today. It's a good word for what we're talking about. He's a really recognizable and useful trust member when you're adventuring on your own.
Yeah, I use him all the time, actually. He's my primary
Good.
tank.
It's because he's a tank and a healer and a DPS. He's just really good if you're going through the base story, the first few expansions, right? But by establishing that we found him in the cenote, he can't be a shard of Vana'diel that exists on the source unless he's an adventurer who wandered in and got possessed by or rejoined and has no memory. That wouldn't make sense. And I also think that would be a really weird NPC to do that with, because as recognizable as he is, he's not exactly an NPC with a lot of personality.
Yeah.
To pull that writing into, right? Which is why I'm kind of leaning in the direction of, what if this is Alexander? What if this is Odin? What if this is like a human version of a boss or an entity in 11 that we could then turn into a boss fight later, kind of like we got Derek turned into the Wanderer. We all saw that coming from a mile away. Right, in the 12 Alliance Raid series. I'm wondering if they could be doing something similar here. Again, fully aware of my own bias in this situation, but I do think it would be fun to bring fights back in a way that gives more personality to bosses that didn't really have that many to begin with, other than here's a fight. So yeah, because there's another idea that I would hate if they did this, and I hope that they're not, because again, it would not be the best writing, where he's just the stand-in NPC for all of the other really important NPCs that we don't get to talk to, like if he's the stand-in for Aldo, who just bounces ideas off of people, if he's the stand-in for like every quest giver on main story stuff. Yeah, like, you see what I mean? That would be boring. It wouldn't be interesting if he just, oh yeah, and then I ascend to Promathia. I'm like, you didn't have to invent a new character for that. You could have just put the guy who already did it in the game. if that makes sense. And that could be said
Yeah.
for pretty much every fight. It's like, okay, well then he turns into Lilith. I'm like, okay, but you could have just brought out Lilith as, you know, it would be funny to see Al-Shal in Lilith's outfit. I will be entirely real. I think it would be funny. But it wouldn't be conducive to actually telling the story that I think they want to tell, you know?
Yeah. No, if they introduce him, he has to have some important role there.
Exactly.
Not just like, and I'm still kind of, you know, squint eyes at the fact that he appeared at Cenote, which is already a loaded place to appear.
Right.
So,
because he recognizes certain things in our world as being part of Vana'diel, going back to we started with talking about Mamuk. So he is someone who knows things about the world. He knows who Prish is. Prish doesn't know him. Prish would know everybody who traveled with our like player character. So here's what I'm thinking that dialogue is. If it does change gender based on who the player character is, maybe Prish is referencing you as a player if you had a character in 11 instead of you as the warrior, because as the warrior of light, because you are a part of this conversation when she's having this thought. It just doesn't make sense in the context of it being the warrior of the light. My concern there is if Vana'diel is a shard instead of its own reality, would that place the crystal warrior Euroc in 11 as a shard of your Azam, as far as your warrior of light goes?
I hate that idea so much.
I mean, it would make sense. I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I don't know that Vana'diel as a shard would make sense narratively at this point.
Yeah, no, I mean, I naturally cannot, you know, say this is not it because we don't have all the information.
We simply don't know, right?
And we're just lore divers, so we cannot discard things like this is absolutely not possible. There's no absolutes in here, but I doubt narratively it makes sense. Like, Vana'diel as a shard is like the easy answer, if it makes sense.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, I kind of like that they changed the pronouns if Prish is, like, missing her friend, the Crystal Warrior, having that still be ascribed to the player, right? Because that's a nod to the fact that a lot of 14 players did come from 11. Or, in my experience, there's a lot of 14 players going into 11 for the first time because of these raids, which is also really fun. So it could also just be a nod to you as a person behind the screen, that, like, Prish remembers you, and Prish misses you. Because I miss her too. That's my daughter. That's my 70-year-old daughter.
I love Prish too.
I'm amazed that they didn't actually acknowledge that in the Alliance raid, actually, because it's something I was thinking about while discussing this with some friends who had never played 11. They don't actually explain that Prish isn't 16. Like, they don't go into the fact that she is actually a grandma stuck in the body of a teenager. The only dialogue that references it is when she talks to Bakul Jaja and she apologizes, like, oh, I of all people shouldn't be the person judging someone based on their appearance. And then she doesn't dive into the age thing. And I'm like, okay, are we just going to discuss this later, or is the 14 player base just going to continue to be like, oh, she's a kid? I'm like, she's like 3 times older than Bakul Jaja.
No, we're just going to ignore it. It's fine.
but yeah, I'm the thing with Frisch is I don't know how deep they want to go into references to other Final Fantasies that are, but this is a Final Fantasy theme park, so at the same time I'm like, and it's the fact that in Dissidia Duodecim, Frisch is the one who gives the Warrior of Light, OG Warrior of Light, his name. So yeah. I'm kind of in there because there's a real special connection in this city established between Prish and John Final Fantasy, if you will. So
at least you use it in context.
So, and this carries over to the City Opera Omnia, in which when there's an arc going, you know, a bridge version of the whole shebang, basically the party ends up screwing up and destroying both crystals of light and darkness. So the Warrior of Light and Garland have to stay behind to be stuck in eternal conflict to sustain the world, the new world that's going to start to come, that's actually flooded by light. And everyone forgets about the the OG Warrior of Light who has been their leader, instead thinking that the Onion Knight from Final Fantasy III has been their leader, except Prish. Except Trish, because of her bond with John Final Fantasy, she is the one who still remembers still remembers him, and that he has been he was the leader of the party. So I don't know how this whole thing can translate. I was like, I would just say it's such a shame that the city of Omnia is out of service, but I would say please go check the cutscenes for the city of Omnia. It's so great.
And it's also a testament to just the kind of character that Prish is, because she doesn't let anything stop her, really. She knows what she wants, she knows what she needs to do, and by God, she's gonna do it.
I going back to the City Opera Omnia, I mean, the City Opera Omnia is kind of the follow-up to the regular Dissidia. I mean, I love the PSP games with Prish wasn't in the first one, was she?
No, and she was introduced.
She was in 012
Duodecim,
yeah. She was hilarious in that one. Absolutely hilarious, and one of my favorite characters to play as. But that's how I knew her. And then from that one, I played a little bit of 11, and I got to know her in game. But mainly, I knew Prish from Dissidia. So going into the raid, I knew a little bit about her personality to say, oh yeah, that's totally something that she'd do.
So yeah.
I know we're a little bit over, but I do want to talk real quick about Surreal Jaw again.
Yes.
And a little bit about the Rift. So when we discover he basically found a bunch of Electrope in the Rift, it was basically kind of a half confirmation, half vindication. And it opened up a can of worms for me, in that if there's Electrope in the Rift, and he basically said, fortunate then that world between worlds was filled with structures made from Electrope, more than I could ever hope for.
Reservation, what have you done?
Yeah, right. Which, I mean, I know every time Electrope comes up, I always bring up that it's not unique to Alexandria, because we know it's on the first, and now we know that it's in the Rift. Wherever it was that Surreal Jaw went, it's there too. So it made me wonder, what exactly is Electrope? And I started speculating that before Aether kind of coalesces into what it is, baryonic Aether, or baryonic matter, basically the physical Aether that you can touch, that everything's made from, it made me wonder if it's like, if it starts out as Electrope and then it naturally degrades, kind of like plutonium has a half-life, that eventually it degrades.
Yeah.
Or condensed, like how stars can eventually become planets.
Yes, exactly. Where it basically creates elements in its core before they die. And whatever etheric affinity they have, or whatever they're leaning to, that's kind of what it aspects towards. It just made me think a lot about that, but it was nice to have confirmation that not only is Electrope everywhere, but it's almost definitely at this point on the source. And it makes me wonder again, where is it? And have we seen it already?
Sorry.
No, I was going to say the follow-up to this is the very last piece of dialogue that we get from the last cutscene, the meanwhile in Ruan Gardens, right? Surreal Jaw says, with the strength of the ancients, I will bring Tyrell, no, the whole world to its knees.
Well, it's meanwhile in the echo of Tulia.
Yeah, in the echo of Tulia,
it's in
right?
the gardens, though.
Yeah, it is. They're walking through the gardens is when they're having this, right? Surreal Jaw is not someone who has context for Amarot or Elpis or Aetheris as it was before.
Yep.
I don't think that man knows what a Sundering is.
Nope.
With the strength of the ancients, if he is someone who has looked into the Walk of Echoes and is staring up at this structure built by the Zealert to basically be living memory, as far as like conceptualizing it in 14 terms goes, it's hard not to think of the ancients he's referencing as the Zeal art, especially given like the story that we got in Dawn Trail, and the fact that we talked about orogenics being very similar in architecture internally to the crags also built by the Zeal art. And what if Electrope is the thing that connects these?
I would say even if he did have concept or context for Amarat and the Ancients, the Zealot are so much older that what we regard as the Ancients in 14 would probably be like the infants.
Yeah, and also Ancients, as far as Ascians go, right? They wouldn't want to bring the world to its knees. They were trying to put it back together.
Right.
Yeah.
And
right? It's a fundamentally different society versus what the Zealot were trying to do at the end, what they became.
And also putting the... Sorry, go.
Sorry. What I think would be absolutely fascinating is if we're not dealing with another shard. But I know, Meowth, either you or Aeneas had brought it up earlier, that we've always asked, what was the world like before Amarat, before the Ancients, before that society that they had? And it would be fascinating to me, and the timeline would kind of line up if this was a story about how humanity got to that point.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, it would. I mean, I think we're eventually going to. If you allow me a bit of madcap, very, very, very summarized. I think that this coming to Dawn Trail is the threshold to awakening assassin, because that's very much where we're heading into. 8.0 is going to delve a bit, is going to start treating the story of Asam and Hades, and then the 9.0 will be about the history previous to the ancients. That could have some ties to the whole thing, but that's my take from very, very abridged as for where do I see the narrative going. Yeah. So I think Vana'diel is still older than the beginning of society of Etheris, because I mean it would make sense because Etheris in the end 14 is its own world in a sense, right? And Vana'diel, to me right now it makes more sense that it was the world that came before Etheris. I mean, technically, that's what it is, honestly.
Right.
So still, the raid series would be giving us insight into the world that came before us, and then in the supposedly conclusion, in as far as they have hinted to be 9.0, because they say 3 expansions for this art. It could change, but that's what they say, so that's what I'm working with. Then learning about the origins of Theris as its own world, but they can still tie that to Vana'diel. So yeah, that. It sounds like a mouthful, but I understand myself.
Yeah, no, we're right there with you. Anytime this comes up, I still just picture like old man La Habrea in his like robes, looking down at Aeldenarsh, going, "Who let this small child in here?" And Aeldenarsh looking up at him, going, "I'm 10,000 years older than you." Like, I see the vision.
Yeah, and for me, I'm starting to lean towards Electrope being this natural mineral that has all but maybe disappeared on the source because of the rejoinings. I don't know, but basically because it's so abundant in apparently the Echo of 11.
Because I'm replaying Endwalker, you bet your ass I'm taking shots of every fucking golden thing. Yeah. We got confirmation that Giant Skull was used in the warding scales against tempering, and that the MSQ explains that it is a material that the alchemists of Thavner use for etheric conductivity.
Okay, so Giant Skull.
So.
But that still makes it not nearly as abundant as we've seen in both Alexandria and currently Vana'diel.
No, so far we only know that it's in Thavner and in Corvus, Lucus Amenus.
Okay.
So we got the confirmation because I also took shots of the explanation for the radius, the Guardian radius, the ore that they use for that actually protected them from tempering, and Arun Senna, the White Mage's brother to Kandasena,
Yeah, yeah.
in the whole thing brings up the wording scale for comparison, says it's virtually the same. So we basically have that confirmation that, and then in Galmal they confirmed that they mined this ore from the radius from Locus Amenus, from Corvus. So we got the confirmation that it's really similar to the wording scale. Well, basically virtually the same, and the place in which it's basically mined in. And then we have to also bear in mind that they brought Thavner and Ratatan with the alliance to Tuliolo in Dawntrail. So it's like, okay.
Interesting. Okay.
And there's a lot of Zodiac things and themes in Thavner, by the way. I've no kidding, the radiant armor, like the guard, the radiance, the color scheme they use for their armor is the exact same as the Ophiuchus Oracite in Tactics.
Okay.
So the thing I was actually telling you off stream that I believe, quote unquote, as in speculation, that Electrope is to Zodiac what Oracite is to Ultima.
Right.
But yeah. I mean, darkness is the element of the elements in a sense, like growth, activity, and life and rebirth.
Right.
So
there's a lot to think about.
lots.
Yeah.
And by the way, when I say Zodiac, for people who are not so familiar with my ramblings, when I say Zodiac, I'm not talking about Primal Zodiac. I'm talking about Evolution Zodiac, like the real Zodiac. And also
Zodiac.
on that note, NES. I don't know if you saw it, but like weeks ago, someone brought up a comparison in artwork for Altana and Ultima's Primal 4. So I don't know what you think about that, but
my suggestion is to look up Ascended Lilith and then have
okay.
a conniption. Because Ascended Lilith is supposed to mimic Altana's form, and Ascended Lilith is essentially where like Ultima's wing motif came from.
Great.
Yeah, go forth and do with that what you will. I feel like I'm giving it I feel like every time we talk on podcast, I give you a quest, and then you come back.
Keep feeding the meow.
I love it.
At least in turn I can feed the NES with Final Fantasy 13, so it's a tit for tat.
It's a give and take. I look forward to when we shift away from 11 stuff, and then you have your 13 episode. I get to sit here and just marvel. It'll be a good time.
Yes.
We have yet to do the Nier episode. Ooh.
Yeah, on Drakengard.
It's coming. It's
Yeah,
in the future. It'll
And,
happen.
We're gonna go off. Miat and I are gonna go off on that.
And that would be my piece.
All right.
That does about cover a lot of the 11 Alliance Raid stuff. I know we kind of skipped some things, but the truth is, a lot of it we covered pretty well the first time we did an 11 episode. So if you haven't listened to that yet, that is a somewhat cohesive explanation of most of the 11 story, as well as a deep dive into like the specific fights and who the Shadow Lord is and all of that.
Can I say I'm
good
so
stuff.
happy we did that, because I would have been so lost going into this without that episode.
Right, because you're not like getting the full story out of this. You're just getting the boss fights, which is fun in and of itself, and it establishes itself as a pretty good standalone story in 14. But I do think the context adds a lot to it. There's a lot more emotional weight to everything.
I agree. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We are going to have another week off next week due to Thanksgiving holiday, but we will be back the week after to talk about the MSQ in this game. And I'm sure the 11 raids are going to come back again, just because there's there's a lot to talk about. So very much looking forward to that. Anybody have anything else to say before we wrap up today?
Please tune into the World Race.
Yes.
Starts on Tuesday.
World Race.
Starts on
Tell us about
Tuesday.
that. What's going on with that?
So as always, we're doing a 24/7 broadcast. What's different this time is it's going to be 24/7 commentary as well. So no matter what time of day or night or what continent you're on, if you tune in, you're going to get commentary. We've got some special segments, one of which has been announced. It's like a daily cocktail hour or a nightly because it's at 10 p.m. Eastern, so it's an appropriate time for me to drink, at least, which I'm looking forward to.
And that's with
there's-
Sydney and Sly.
Yep, that is Sid and Sly are putting together themed drinks for it. As always, we're raising money for charity this time. It's going to look a bit different because of the Echo partnership. Again, a lot that I can't share yet, but please keep an eye on the Mog Talk and Echo socials for some cool announcements in the next few days. And y'all should tune in. You may hear a familiar voice, see a familiar face.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Yes.
And for us, I think Ayumi and I settled on Sundays starting tomorrow for
Starting tomorrow, yes, we are going to be playing through Tactics Advance.
Ooh.
Oh, hell
every
yeah.
Sunday. So tune in for that.
which time we settled upon. I actually don't remember.
Around, we'll say, well, what time works best for you? Because I can do any time except for in the early morning.
We're around 6 hours apart, so
Yeah, we'll say 10 o'clock in the morning my time. So 6 hours ahead would be about 4 p.m. your time.
more or less, yeah. 4 or 5. So yeah.
4 or
Yeah,
5, yeah.
so-
So just getting into the evening for you.
So yeah.
So we'll say 10 o'clock Central Time. Tune in then.
Awesome. Lots of good stuff. All right. Well,
It is, yeah, because Tactics
It is.
Advance, I suspect, is going to come to play next expansion references, because it is already a reference that many people miss in Final Fantasy 16.
It was a game of my childhood, and I put many, many hours into that game.
It was my
Many
first
hours.
Final Fantasy. It was my first when I was 7 years old.
I actually played that first before Tactics. So
it looks
Same.
It looks like Quantum's been replaying through Tactics Advance as well.
It's one game I always come back to.
yes.
All right. Well, awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Hope you had a good time, and we will see you when we come back.
See you.
Hi, everybody.
Have a good one.